Right, we now come to the statement called the Secretary of State for Defence, Grant Shapps.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'd like to update the House on the Government's commitment to increase defence spending to 2.5% this decade. In January, in my speech to Lancaster House, I warned that we're entering a much more dangerous period, a much more dangerous world, and I made the case for a national conversation about defence spending. Since then, Putin has stepped up his attacks on Ukraine. China is increasingly assertive. Tensions have escalated in the Middle East, culminating in Iran's unprecedented attack on Israel 10 days ago, conducted in parallel with the proxies that Iran has nourished around Israel's border and the Middle East, including, of course, the Houthis, who continue to hold global trade hostage in the Red Sea. Mr. Speaker, since January, the world has become even more dangerous, not less, and we continue to ask more of our courageous and professional armed forces. Our sailors have served under the constant risk of attack in the Red Sea, helping to protect international shipping and our own cost of living. We bolstered our Royal Air Force presence in the Middle East, enabling Typhoon crews to intercept Iranian drones and missiles recently fired towards Israel. And around 20,000 of our personnel from all three of our services, with a huge inventory of naval, air and land assets, have been active around Europe as part of the largest NATO training exercise since the Cold War. In short, Mr. Speaker, we increasingly need our armed forces, and we increasingly are asking more of them. So yesterday, the Prime Minister committed to hit the 2.5% of GDP for defence by 2030. It means we'll invest an additional £75 billion into defence over the next 6 years, and it will be funded in full without any increases in either borrowing or debt. This represents the biggest strengthening of our national defence in a generation, and as the NATO General Secretary said yesterday, it will ensure the UK remains by far the largest European defence spender in NATO, and it means we're the second biggest NATO spender overall. It will provide a very significant boost for the UK defence science, innovation and manufacturing. It will make our defence industries more resilient and bigger, and it will mean that we're able to restock some of those global supplies required in order to continue to ensure that we're not only able to provide our own armed forces, those in Ukraine, but also be a competitive export sector as well. We also recognise the important role that defence plays in our national resilience by developing a new plan that, for the first time, brings together the civil and the military planning for how we would respond in the most severe risks that face our country. And Mr. Speaker, our additional £75 billion on defence is also enabling us to ramp up that support for Ukraine. Honourable and right honourable members on both sides of the House have shared the government's concern about the warnings that President Zelensky has been issuing, and his most senior generals have confirmed that their ability to match Russia's force is increasingly difficult. And so, as NATO partners, we're looking at each other to see that leadership, and the UK government has stepped forward. We're providing the alliance with the decisive leadership demanded in this knife-edge moment of this existential war. And so we've committed this week an extra £500 million of military aid to Ukraine this year, bringing our total package to £3 billion. And our total, in fact, since Putin's full-scale invasion, is now more than £12.5 billion, £7.5 billion of which is military aid. In addition, we've provided NATO partners with leadership by delving even deeper into our own military inventory to give Ukraine our largest package of equipment and support to date. Now, this support announced this week includes millions of rounds of ammunition, 1,600 key munitions, including air defence and precision long-range missiles, over 400 armoured, protected and all-terrain vehicles, as well as support with logistics to support and bolster the front lines, support to get the F-16 pilots who've trained in the UK into the air as soon as possible, and a further 60 boats to help Ukraine strengthen their remarkable grip over the Black Sea, including offshore raiding craft and dive boats. Our £75 billion defence investment will help Ukraine get back onto the front foot. And coupled with the reforms that we've introduced to make procurement faster and more effective, it will put our defence industrial base on a war footing. It will fire up the UK's defence industry with an additional £10 billion over the next decade for munitions production. That will bring our total spend on munitions to around £25 billion over the same period. We're delivering for those who serve to guarantee our freedoms as well, with over £4 billion to be invested in upgrading accommodation to build new living quarters for our personnel over the next decade. And we're also working seamlessly with key allies to strengthen our collective deterrent and develop new, innovative capabilities. Just last month, I was in Australia to advance our AUKUS programme with our Australian and our US partners. This will develop and deliver a range of cutting-edge kit in addition to the next generation of nuclear-powered submarines. And at the end of last year, I was in Japan to advance our GCAP programme. That's the development of the 6th generation fighter jet with Italy and with Japan. And just last week, I was in Telford to see the first fully British tank for 22 years coming off the production line. And just one strand of our Future Soldier programme to make our army more integrated and much more lethal. Defence already, of course, supports tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs, real quality to them in the UK, including over 200,000 directly in the industry. And our additional £75 billion will open up many more opportunities in regions up and down this country. Mr. Speaker, this is a turning point in UK defence. We must spend more because defence of the realm is the first duty of every government. And on this side of the House, we recognise that fact. But whilst I want to see peace and, of course, international order being restored, I'm also absolutely convinced that it's hopeful thinking, even complacency, to imagine that we can do that without ensuring we are better protected. The best way of keeping a country safe and to protect our way of life is deterrence. Being prepared, being clear-eyed about the threats we face, being clear about our capabilities, backing UK defence science, technology and innovation, carrying not just a big stick but the most advanced and capable stick that we can possibly develop. And yes, using our military muscle alongside our allies. Our investment in our continuous at-sea nuclear deterrent makes would-be adversaries think twice. And on this side of the House, we haven't just come to the conclusion that our nation's nuclear deterrent is there because an election is approaching. We have always believed in our nuclear deterrent. This is an additional £75 billion boost for our armed forces. And in the build-up to the NATO summit in Washington, I'll do all I can to get alliance members to follow our lead, to bolster their armed forces, to strengthen their industrial base, invest in innovation, maximise their military deterrence, and to maximise their support for Ukraine, most importantly of all. Because in a more dangerous world, when we face an excess of authoritarian states, 2.5% must now become the new baseline for the entire alliance. If we're to deter, lead and defend, that is what is required of us. And I commend this statement to the House.
Secretary of State John Healey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for the advance copy of his statement. There is much to welcome In this statement and more widely today, with the US Congress finally passing the bill for more military aid to Ukraine and the Prime Minister finally making a multi-year commitment to UK military aid beyond this year. We do indeed face a much more dangerous world, with British forces now in action defending international shipping in the Red Sea, reinforcing NATO allies on the Russian border and protecting us all 24/7. They are respected worldwide for their total professionalism. They require our support from all sides of this House. So we welcome the new commitments to Ukraine funding. We welcome the build-up stockpiles to boost defence exports, to give priority to domestic defence production and to set up a new strategic headquarters in the MOD. All plans I've argued for in this post. Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State is right when he says the first duty of any government is to defend the country and keep its citizens safe. And Labour will always do what's required, spend what's required on defence. And the last time the UK did spend 2.5% of GDP on defence was in 2010 with Labour. Never matched in any one of the 14 Tory years since. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, the Labour leader said, "We want a fully funded plan for 2.5% of GDP on defence." We share the same ambition as the government because we must do more to deal with the growing threats. We want this to be fully costed and fully funded. We want it to be set out in the government's baseline budgets. This 2030 target is not. It's in a press release. Why was this 2030 plan not in last month's budget? Or any of the other 5 budgets and autumn statements since the government first promised to spend 2.5% by 2030 2 years ago? None hit 2.5%, none reversed real cuts in day-to-day defence spending, none matched Labour's record in government. If this 2030 plan had been in a budget, it would have been independently checked, openly costed and fully funded. So where is the additional money coming from? How much from which other R&D budgets? How much from cutting how many civil servants in which departments? Mr. Speaker, they've tried this trick before. In the 2015 Defence Review, ministers pledged to cut 30% of the MOD's civil servants to make their defence spending plans add up. Civil servant numbers didn't go down, they went up. Not down to 41,000, but up to 63,000. Now, he's mentioned an additional 75 billion 5 times in his statement. Over the next 6 years, the government's official spending plans are based on a 0.5% real annual growth in core defence spending. Why has he invented his own zero growth baseline to produce this fake figure claiming an extra £75 billion for defence? Mr. Speaker, the public will judge ministers by what they do, not what they say. And over 14 years, they've hollowed out our armed forces. They've cut the army to its smallest size since its Napoleon. They've missed their own recruitment targets each and every year. They've allowed morale to fall to record lows, and they've wasted at least £15 billion on mismanaging defence procurement. Mr. Speaker, everyone recognises defence spending must rise to deal with increasing threats. We have no access to classified threat assessments or military advice in opposition. So if we are elected to government, we'll conduct a strategic defence review within our first year to get to grips with the threats that we face, the capabilities that we need, the state of the armed forces and the resources available when we get to open the books. This is how Labour will manage the requirements for strong national security and the responsibility for sound public finances. Mr. Speaker, the Defence Secretary clearly likes Labour's plans for defence as so much is now government policy.
Yep.
But there's still no Tory plan to reinforce homeland protections with a new strategic review, to fulfil NATO obligations in full with a NATO test on our major programmes, to renew the nation's contract with those who serve with an independent forces commissioner to make allies our strategic strength, with a new EU, French or German defence agreement. Mr. Speaker, with threats increasing and tensions growing, we must make Britain better defended. And with Labour, Britain will be better defended.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me just start on the areas that I agree with. He mentions how much we welcome the US Congress putting their $60 billion into the defence of Ukraine. It is something that we warmly welcome. As Churchill was reputed to once have said, America usually gets on and does the right thing when it's exhausted all other alternatives. And it took a long time, but we have got to the point where that money is going to come to Ukraine. And I think that is very, very welcome across this House. He says that he welcomes this announcement today, and then spends all his time explaining, or rather avoiding explaining, why they themselves are not backing 2.5%, with a schedule, with a timescale, with figures which have been published and are in the document produced yesterday and laid in the library of the House. He says, judge us by our action, not our words. You know what? We will, because 11 members of that side's front bench voted against Trident. So it's no good for him and the leader of the opposition to go up to Barrow and to claim that they're all in favour now of the nuclear weapons, of the nuclear defence, because they stood on a platform with a leader who wanted to scrap Trident, wanted to pull them out of NATO, wanted to turn the army into, what was it, a peace corps? Into a peace corps. And now they tell us, judge us on our actions. Well, where is the Shadow Foreign Secretary who voted against Trident? Where is the Shadow Deputy Prime Minister who voted against Trident? Where is the Shadow Community Secretary who voted against Trident? None of them today here on the front bench, none of them presumably in full agreement with the right honourable gentleman, because when it comes to the defence of the realm and when it comes to defending this country, this is the party that has always believed in our nuclear deterrent. We're upgrading it, we're making sure it's fit for purpose, and it's fine for him to come to this dispatch box, neither support the 2.5%, and the House will have noted that, and then also talk about a new review, yet another review. If the problem was having reviews in defence, there would be no issues at all. It is the last thing this country and armed forces require, is yet another review, delay, disruption and obfuscation.
Chair of the Select Committee, Jeremy Quin.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is right to say that we're continually asking more of our armed forces, as the Select Committee's recent report made clear. In that context, I greatly welcome the announcement and the increased investment. But what, of course, we want this to unleash is a triple whammy, one in which our industrial partners also seize the opportunity to invest heavily in capital equipment and in R&D, and in which our NATO allies also see this as a new benchmark to which those who don't already can also aspire and meet. What are we doing to ensure we don't only make this investment, but we also achieve that triple whammy?
Well, my right honourable friend and Chair of the Select Committee is absolutely right about the investment point. I spoke to my opposite number, the US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin, yesterday evening, and we were talking about how this will help to galvanise NATO in particular for greater investment, and specifically so that when we go to the NATO summit in Washington for the 75th anniversary, this new baseline is 2.5% rather than 2%, as was set by the UK actually back in 2014, with now, I think, 18 or so of the NATO's 32 members having reached that sum. So investment in that very important signal that's now sent to the whole industrial base for defence, I think, is a critical part of why it is very important to actually set out that plan and stick to it and actually agree to the 2.5% by 2030.
Martin Docherty-Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State clearly has a Herculean task to find £75 billion. So let's seek some clarity on where that may be found, though I have to say I do welcome the investment if it's in capability. And I do agree with the Shadow Defence Secretary as to why it wasn't in the budget. I think we all know, because it wouldn't stand up to scrutiny. But let me also welcome the the Secretary of State's investment in Ukraine on the back of the US's commitment. I have to say to your US colleagues, it was long overdue. So let me ask some specific questions. And it is the duty of opposition to challenge government, and we will have our differences. Now, with no increase in borrowing or debt, the implication is for deeper cuts to other public services, because if the government has assumed a baseline with spend frozen in cash terms as of GDP, as I think alluded to the Shadow Defence Secretary, that comes nowhere near £75 billion. Now, as myself coming from a services family, I wonder if the Secretary of State will commit to direct increase in spend on accommodation, training and recruitment as part of this proposal, given that we're at a near Napoleonic decline on the front line and where we have pushed members of the armed forces into food banks and near penury. Now, the Secretary of State and I, of course, will disagree on the nuclear deterrent, but I do wonder if he can answer one specific point while he retains it. The nuclear enterprise has been exposed as unaffordable in its latest report by the NEO. So what assurances can the Secretary of State give the House that the nuclear deterrent will not continue to cannibalise the MOD budget and specifically the £75 billion that he has proposed today?
Mr. Speaker, the first thing I should point out actually in the document that is in front of the House, that on page 20 in the annex, it actually describes the uplift in defence budget. We've headlined it as £75 billion. In fact, when you go through and you add up the individual year on year, it actually reaches £77 billion of expenditure. You can see exactly there how we'll get to it. Secondly, it is fully funded. In particular, and I know that the party opposite doesn't like the idea, but we're going to remove 72,000 civil servants from the system, not because we don't think they're good people, and fortunately, with low unemployment, we know they'll be gainfully employed elsewhere, but because we want to get back to the size of the civil service that we had before COVID, before it expanded greatly, and we see no reason to continue to run a civil service with 70,000 additional people each year when that money could be going into the defence of the realm. He asks about our commitment to armed forces and personnel and their families and accommodation. He may have missed it in my statement, but I mentioned £4 billion over this period that will now be investing thanks to this big uplift in their accommodation and conditions. And he'll be aware, I think, that last year there were a lot of problems with leaks and boilers not being fixed for considerable periods of time. There haven't been those stories this year because we've got on top of that with £400 million and making sure the contractors are doing their job. And as he rightly says, we have our differences on things like nuclear deterrence. But I have to say, if there's something that benefits Scotland in particular, I would suggest that what goes on at Faslane, the extraordinary high-quality jobs that produces, and the proud part they play in this nation's defence.
Sir Julian Lewis, Chair of the Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The main reason why this welcome uplift has come when it has been because of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that if Russia and Putin are seen to fail in Ukraine, then the threat to NATO will be put back for at least a generation? Conversely, if they succeed, the threat to NATO will intensify. So will he do everything he can to persuade our allies, and especially certain parts of the United States political new establishment, that the success of Ukraine is essential for the peace of Europe and indeed the peace of the world?
Well, right on, friends, absolutely right. Although this is £75 billion, and although it takes our budget to 2.5% of GDP, this is a fraction of what it would cost if Putin were successful in Ukraine. There is no chance he would stop there, none. And others would look at this, autocrats elsewhere, and they would exploit the idea that all you have to do is outweight the West, and we'll get bored of it, some form of attention deficit, and we'll give up defending the things that we said we would never stop defending. And that, in the end, will cost us all a huge amount more.
Kevan Jones.
Can I first of all congratulate the Secretary of State on his stellar Used Car Salesman Act, which we've come to get used to. But can I, on the 26th of March this year, he appeared before the Defence Select Committee along with officials. His Strategic Finance Director confirmed that next year, when you take Ukraine funding out of the budget, the defence budget falls. So can he tell the House how he reconciles that fact, confirmed by his own officials, with his claim today and the Prime Minister's yesterday of putting this country on a war footing?
Well, I'm really sorry that the Honourable Gentleman cheapens what is a very, very important discussion about the defence of the realm with such a ridiculous remark. We all come here in the spirit to discuss these things in a manner which I think is important given the subject issue. He mentions and asks the question about Ukraine. Look, Ukraine is part of what our armed forces and this country are having to deal with. And we don't ask America to strip out their help to Ukraine in the same way as we didn't ask them to strip out their help to Afghanistan or ours or Iraq or ours, because it is part of our core defence budget. And yesterday, and I didn't mention this in my statement, and perhaps on this basis the Honourable Gentleman may be forgiven, Right Honourable, may be forgiven, because we also said yesterday that our enhanced amount of money to Ukraine isn't now just for this year. We are going to carry on doing that every single year into the future. So yes, it is part of our core expense.
Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend the Secretary of State for obtaining this massive £75 billion increase in defence, which theoretically would actually allow us to buy 20 new Queen Elizabeth-class aircraft carriers. At the risk of upsetting our excellent First Sea Lord, we're not likely to do that, but we are putting our defence industry on a war footing. So can we do the concomitant thing and create a war reserve of equipment with older Typhoons, older warships and older armoured vehicles, so that if we had to fight at short notice, we have enough equipment to do it, and so we can tell our adversaries, when we say civis pacem parabellum, we actually mean it.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his words, but not just for that, but for his constant campaigning on this subject. Those of us who've been subject to him in a select committee know that he knows his facts, knows what he's talking about, and has done as much as anybody to ensure that this uplift is happening. I can confirm to the House we won't be using the £75 billion for 20 new aircraft carriers. He mentions an interesting point about what we could do with the older equipment. I have to say to my right honourable friend, right now I'm much more minded to send that equipment to Ukraine, and that's why yesterday I pulled together the biggest package of donation to date in this now into the third-year war of equipment to Ukraine. I think for the time being we'll be sending it in the easterly direction.
Twigg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Secretary of State what he believes a war footing is?
Very simply, actually, and Ukraine has taught a lot to the world about this. When it comes to doing things like producing sufficient munitions to restock the Ukrainians, it's very difficult to do that instantaneously, in fact impossible. And so you've got this global competition for 155s or for missiles, and what we want to do is make sure that our own industrial defence estate is able to produce those things by telling them they're on a war footing, by putting £75 billion more in, and critically, by naming the date by which we'll get there, we put that industry on that war footing.
Drax.
Mr. Speaker, can I commend my honourable friend for his stalwart stubbornness in getting this raise, so important raise, in defence spending, and I congratulate him. He and I both know, actually, that a lot more money is needed, but this is a step in the right direction. He's off shortly to meet NATO members, and I fear he's got a lot of work to do, because, for example, if you look at the Straits of Hormuz, one of the major trade routes for NATO and the West, only 2 NATO members are actually prepared to open fire on the Houthis. So does he feel that there's a lot of work to do when he goes to meet these NATO members, that they step up and spend 2.5% on defence, as they should do and as we are going to do?
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank my gallant friend for his comments. He's absolutely right to point out that when it comes to being prepared to use the abilities that we have, this is a country, one of the only countries, which has both the global reach but also the desire and the preparedness to use them. That's why we end up in the Red Sea with the Houthis defending ships, and I can report there's been a particular incident today along these lines with our armed forces in action, and we can be very proud of everything that they do for us.
Richard Foord.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And on behalf of the Liberal Democrats, may I welcome this statement about increased defence spending, albeit that it is about a time 6 years hence, rather than being specific about funding in the intervening years. There are 18 of 32 NATO members that are still not spending even 2% of GDP, including France, Spain and Italy. Encouraging them to spend more isn't so much about fairness, it's about helping to persuade sceptics in the United States that North America should remain engaged in Europe. Leverage with the NATO members at the summit in July is too late. What additional commitments did he and others in government obtain from allies before announcing the 2030 pledge?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, first of all, I can assure the honourable gentleman that this actually starts this year. The £500 million is this year's budget. We've opted to give that money directly to Ukraine in addition to the money that we're gifting to them, bringing us to £3 billion in total. Secondly, I'd very gently point out, I don't think I've ever heard the Lib Dem benches arguing for more defence spending, but I welcome them strongly to this cause. I agree with him entirely that 2%, which we ourselves set back in 2014, is no longer the baseline that we should be working to. I'd also gently point out to him that the reason that Trident, and in particular the subs, have taken some time to replace, there's a small period in coalition when we couldn't get our Lib Dem partners to agree to get on with the job.
Sir Bernard Jenkin.
Deputy Speaker, if I may just in passing pay tribute to the late Frank Field, who voted for the renewal of Trident, unlike many on the front bench, and would have understood that deepening our defence capability in the conventional forces is a vital part of the deterrence that NATO provides for the security of Europe. And I commend my right honourable friend and the government for leading the way on this and setting the example by leadership.
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend and actually also add my condolences to those others in the House this afternoon, to Frank Field, who was a great statesman, had really, really innovative ideas about welfare reform, which it took this government to actually enact, and is a great loss to us all. And I agree with him entirely about the leadership in NATO. Getting to 2.5%, I was talking to the NATO Secretary-General about this yesterday. We must make sure that this is the new level at which people operate. And if they did, if everyone joined us at 2.5%, then there'd be £135 billion per annum more in the collective NATO budget. It would make a huge difference.
Dame Nia Griffith.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, Labour is absolutely committed to reaching 2.5%, and we very much welcome the additional £500 million for Ukraine. But time is absolutely of the essence. So what is the Secretary of State doing to speed up the delivery of those much-needed military supplies to the front line in Ukraine?
Good question. I very warmly welcome the Honourable Lady's comments, and I very much hope that her front bench, who haven't attached the timeline that she urges to this, are listening closely to her. In terms of delivery of those items to the front line, we will be extremely fast in a matter of days into weeks on delivering quite a lot of the items that we have outlined in a very extensive package yesterday. They do come into a lot of different forms, and some, by their physical nature, will take longer to deliver than others. But that delivery we can expect in the next few days into weeks.
David Mundell.
Welcome my right honourable friend's announcement and indeed the decision finally made in the United States. Can my right honourable friend confirm that investment will not just go into tech but will go into the logistic and warehousing and background facilities here in the UK, such as at MOD Longtown, a very important employer for my constituency, to ensure that our frontline forces have the best supplied kit that they could possibly have?
My right honourable friend can absolutely have that reassurance. In fact, one of the things we know is that in order to run a really lethal and effective armed forces, the support is actually extraordinarily important. So, yes, he absolutely has my guarantee of that. Yeah.
Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since 2010, the government, with their Liberal Democrat partners, have missed recruitment targets every year, with the Times warning that the Army could fall to 70,000 full-time equivalents. What is the Defence Secretary doing to ensure that those who wish to serve and defend our country are not put off by the broken recruitment system?
Well, the Honourable Lady will be very pleased to hear that at the beginning of this year, in January, and then reflected in February as well, we had an 8-year high in applications for the Army, reflected also through the other services. I do agree we need to be much more effective at getting people who've applied, made the application, to getting right the way through the system. It takes too long. I think it's too disparate, people having to come for an initial interview, go away, come back for a medical. Why not do all those things at once? But other things are really helping as well. There was a nearly 10% pay increase for the lesser paid members of our armed forces this last year. That, I think, has helped with recruitment. And then, of course, people seeing our armed forces in so much action has also helped. But I agree, and my right honourable friend is spending a lot of time ensuring that we do make sure that the many recommendations, I think 67, in the Hawthorne-Waite review are put in place as quickly as possible.
Bias Elwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think I join many voices that have for some time called for an increase in defence spending, so we very much welcome this. And I think privately the Defence Secretary has been hoping this day would come as well. So congratulations on the work he has done behind the scenes to ensure this funding is secured. State-on-state conflict has returned in Europe. The world is more dangerous, more contested, more polarised. Could he expand a little the consequences to UK security and to the UK economy if Russia wins? And before rushing in to spend these increased funds, could he recognise the need to consider the full spectrum of threats and warfare that we face so money is wisely spent?
Well, my right honourable and gallant friend has been a very important part of ensuring that we've got to today. I hadn't realised I'd been keeping my own desire to reach this quite so secret as he describes. He is also correct that the implication of Russia winning this war would be absolutely horrendous. The costs would make the costs of, for example, what this country had to put up with COVID seem small by comparison to what could then happen if other autocratic states decide to take a chunk of other people's land, which could have direct impact on our own economy, and therefore it is absolutely right. This is not, in my view, money that we're spending. This is money that we are investing in our own security to make sure that Russia and other despotic leaders like Putin never think they can try it on with us. We will be investing it extremely wisely in many of the programmes that he and other members across this House are already familiar with, as well as innovative new areas like the Dragonfire.
Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And can we first of all thank the urgent support for Ukraine? Thank you for the urgent support for Ukraine. It's much needed just now. But given that the Institute for Fiscal Studies pointed out the Chancellor's budget that there was a conspiracy of silence between the government and the Labour Party for following the fiscal rules about where £20 billion worth of cuts would come in public services, and that this announcement, according to them, adds another up to £9 billion of cuts to public services, can he explain where those cuts are going to be undertaken?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've already laid out this plan is fully costed and funded, and we've done that by, as I mentioned to the House already, saying that we'll reduce the size of the civil service by 72,000. Now, that's not a one-off cut. That's 72,000 each year of money which is not being paid and therefore helps to fund. And there are some other things that no doubt the Chancellor will wish to get into. But if he takes a look, and I don't know whether he has yet, at page 20 and the annex, he'll see how this is all set out on the page.
Sir Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I first of all absolutely welcome this very important investment in defence. As my right honourable friend says, the world is a very changed place, and it's very important. And I'm sure he'd agree with me that defence is indeed a public service. Just in terms of the extra funding and the projects he's announced, can I ask my right honourable friend to make sure he speaks to the Treasury that the programmes are fully funded and not just capital investment? Because the Treasury have a habit of saying it's fine for capital investment, but let's not worry about revenue. And these projects will need revenue. So can I make sure he has those conversations with the Treasury?
Very good point. My right honourable friend makes a very clear point based on his own experience, I believe, of the department. You've got to make sure that you're just not funding the capital, but that you have the resource to then run the equipment. I think it's a very, very important point he raises. This budget enables us to ensure that that is very much properly done.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I also welcome the 2.5% increase. The world is definitely a more dangerous place and has become so over the last 14 years. I can only suppose that the announcement wasn't made in last month's budget because it would have come under the scrutiny of the OBR. But could the Defence Secretary mention exactly what proportion of this 2.5% will be spent on cyber security and also on armed services personnel?
Well, I should point out to the House, we've always said that we would do this when conditions allowed. Inflation last week fell to just above 3%, 3.2%, down from over 11%. We saw 10 days ago Iran fire hundreds of missiles at a democratic state. We were involved in part in their collective defence. And I think it is therefore to say both the world is showing itself to be even more dangerous, and we have reached the point where we are seeing growth back in the economy, inflation falling, and now is a right time to do this. She asked a very specific point actually about the sums which will go into, for example, cyber or perhaps into space. I don't have those figures on me. I'd be very happy to write to her with a sort of overview, because I think it will take a bit of collation to work out exactly what that would mean from the existing budget, not in no small part because quite a lot of what happens in STRATCOM, so Strategic Command, which covers those areas, crosses over into other parts of the armed forces, so it's not quite a simple question to answer.
Flick Drummond.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I say this very welcome statement, so thank you very much. My right honourable friend mentioned the Rick Haythorne Thwaites report, so I was wondering when we were going to get an update, in particular more about the plan to spend the £4 million investment in the service families accommodation.
Very soon, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Harry.
Thank you very much. I do accept the need for additional defence spending, but can I ask the Defence Secretary for a reassurance that the government's strategy for UK and indeed global security going forward will have an appropriate balance of hard and soft power? By that I mean ongoing investment in diplomacy, humanitarian assistance, international development, including potentially the restoration of the 0.7% of GNI target, and indeed support for the international rules-based order.
Well, I certainly reassure the honourable gentleman that that is something that we're always MOD looking to do. So we've just made our 7th, or perhaps now 8th, drop into Gaza of food aid using the RAF. We're working with the Americans on other solutions, including the PIER, and I work very closely with the FCDO. Indeed, I used to be a DFID minister, so I'm well aware of the issues that he is raising. And MOD will always look to assist wherever we can with our armed forces, often combining that hard and soft power together.
James Sunderland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This has been a good week for defence, and I commend the government on its 2.5% commitment. But the issue, of course, is how we spend it. Rather perhaps than focus on exquisite exclusivity, or heaven forbid, indulge single-service bad behaviour, could the Defence Secretary please confirm to the House that the money will be spent on plugging existing capability gaps, on better operating the platforms that we do have, and ensuring that we have the activity, the resilience, and also the sustainment to make sure that our forces maintain and enhance their world-leading, persistent global posture.
It's an excellent question. My right honourable friend, the Defence Procurement Minister, has done an outstanding job in a publication that I would recommend to everyone in the House, even though the name is the Integrated Procurement Model. It is much more exciting than that sounds. It has, for example, already been the new model responsible for bringing forward the procurement of, again, the Dragonfire by 5 years, because rather than trying to create some exquisite, unbelievably complicated, never quite right piece of equipment, this will instead bring things into the field and then allow them to be spiraled to develop further. So my honourable friend's absolutely right about the way that we're going to use this money much more intelligently in order to make sure we get kit into the field and then expand and improve it from there.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. While welcoming the 2.5%, the modus operandus of this particular Secretary of State is to come to this House, announce billions of pounds to get people salivating about it, only for it never, ever to happen. Northern Powerhouse Rail, HS2. We know it, the country knows it, the brass knows it. So, the Times is reporting that we're going to fall below 70,000 full-time equivalent troops. Where will we be in terms of boots on the ground in a year's time, Secretary of State?
Right. I should say to the honourable gentleman that the way this won't happen is if the public go out and vote for his party, because I haven't heard this afternoon that they're committed to making it happen. So if you want to see 2.5% by 2030, vote Conservative. That's what we're going to give you. I think I'll leave it there.
Sir Simon Clark.
Briefly want to add my tribute to the late Frank Field. He was an extraordinary man and a great parliamentarian. In welcoming the announcement of the additional £75 billion over the next 6 years, which is welcome and much needed, can I urge the Secretary of State to consider the potential for a fifth successor-class submarine, noting that the patrol times for the Vanguard class are now approaching 200 days. That is not sustainable. It's vital, I think, that we give ourselves as much operational capacity as we can with our deterrent.
Well, of course, we'll always keep a very close eye, I say this to my right honourable friend, on the way that we are able to ensure the constant at-sea nuclear defence. I can confirm it has been at sea every single day for 54 years, and we do not intend to have that broken. Whether that requires, quite what that requires is a matter for defence study. As he knows, we're committed to 4 ships. They'll be far more modern in the dreadnoughts, and therefore, as with any modern piece of equipment, likely to be with greater reliability as well. But we will not let this country down when it comes to our nuclear deterrent. And this isn't something, as I said in my comments, my statement, just because we're approaching an election. We have always believed in our nuclear deterrent, and we always will.
Kenny McCaskill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Even Winston Churchill recognised that modern conflicts are fought by peoples, not by armies. Hence why the NHS and the welfare state were the genesis and formed from World War II. Yet now, while military spending is increasing, public services are collapsing. Is it not as important now to wage war on poverty on home as it is to prepare for war abroad? And if there requires to be an increase in the military and defence expenditure, surely that should come from the cancellation of the failed Trident project that is impoverishing the military services, rather than from public services. Why should the people pay for their wars?
I quite literally, Madam Deputy Speaker, could not disagree with the honourable gentleman any more strongly. I know that even in my time as Defence Secretary, there are decisions that I've made that if we had not had the nuclear deterrent, I would have hesitated in making. It protects us every single day in ways which aren't always immediately obvious to everyone. And the idea that by not investing in our defence, we would somehow be safer, that somehow all that money would be available to invest in all these other public services is, I think, to misunderstand the first principle of every government. We are here to defend the realm, without which there would be nothing to pay for internally, because we wouldn't be safe externally.
Sir Edward Lee.
In the 1930s, a wise government ensured that RAF airfields were upgraded and improved, and that saved us from extinction in 1940. Well, if we are to be on a war footing, will the Secretary of State remind the Home Office that it is their duty to maintain the best runway in Europe, 10,000 feet long, at RAF Scampton, instead of letting it rot at present? And if they're incapable of doing it, will they hand it over to Scampton Holdings as soon as possible, as we've argued for 15 months, so it can be used, improved, and be available for a future emergency?
Well, my right honourable friend is speaking to the converted as a keen pilot. I agree with him entirely, and in fact, it usually works the other way around, but I will offer him a meeting so that we can discuss RAF Scampton and its long-term future rather than the short-term in more detail.
Joan Kitchen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Coming from a Labour family, it is important to me that Labour are also wanting to reach 2.5%. Our ambition is no less than the government. The Defence Secretary has said that this defence spending increase will be funded in part by big cuts in the civil servants. So, how much of this cut will be in the MOD civilian workforce, and will the RFA be exempt?
Well, firstly, can I welcome the Honourable Lady's support for this package, for the 2.5%, and gently suggest that conversations with her own front bench would be important at this point, in the interest of national security, that both sides sign up to 2.5% by a deadline, which we note this afternoon has not happened. She asked a specific question about the reduction. It would be 10,000 reduction by 2028 in the MOD. Just to be clear, this is from about 60,000 to 50,000. I personally believe that is exactly the right thing to do. If that is helping to pay for our brave men and women in the armed forces out in the country, less bureaucracy and more action, I think that's a good thing.
Mark Pritchard.
For his recent visit to Shropshire, which he referenced, and also welcome his statement, and indeed the statement of the Prime Minister yesterday. This is record investment into UK defence, which will be very welcome in Shropshire. Would he like to take this opportunity to put on record his thanks to all those that work in uniform and civilians at RAF Cosford, MOD Donington, Babcock, and indeed RBSL BAE Systems, which he recently visited, and confirm that the UK's defence and Shropshire's defence is secure with this government?
Well, I warmly join my right honourable friend in sending exactly that message. As he says, just last week, I was up at looking at the Challenger 3 coming off the production line, the first prototypes, in his patch, and my only regret was that I wasn't able to see him at the same time.
Deirdre Brock.
Deputy Speaker, my written questions this week uncovered another worrying increase in nuclear safety events at nuclear weapon sites in 2023, with the first Category A safety breach in 15 years at Faslane and the highest number of Category B incidents since 2006. Category A incidents defined as those that had an actual or high potential for radioactive release to the environment in breach of safety limits. A former chief advisor to a Prime Minister described existing nuclear stock as rotting and a dangerous disaster. Can he tell us how much of this extra spend will go towards ensuring existing nuclear sites, at the very least, don't deteriorate further, threatening the health and safety of armed forces, staff and surrounding populations?
Well, I'm pleased to report to the Honourable Lady that our defence, and particularly when it comes to our nuclear estate, standards are extremely high. whenever an issue is found, it is properly and thoroughly investigated. Again, she's right to say that it's very important that we continue to invest in that. So, again, this money is good news. Obviously, every bit helps, and we want to make sure that it's being spent appropriately. As it so happens, we do appropriately fund the nuclear estate, but this will help to make sure that that is put well beyond doubt.
James Gray.
This very welcome announcement of a no strings attached, guaranteed move to 2.5% of GDP sends a very, very powerful message indeed to two groups of people. First of all, our NATO partners, and secondly, to our adversaries around the world. But would the Secretary of State not agree with me that that powerful message is undermined by what I can only describe as the mealy-mouthed response of the front benches, both the Labour and Liberal Democrat and Scotland front benches this afternoon? If they will not support what we are doing, what sort of message does that send to Putin and to other enemies? Surely what we don't want now is cross-party consensus on this. It has to be 2.5%, and Labour has to side with us on it.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I could not agree with my honourable friend more.
Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I just take this opportunity to pay tribute to the reservists based in Croydon, who among many roles have been in Estonia helping to keep us all safe. Labour wants to reach 2.5%, but my friend the Shadow Defence Secretary asked why there is no budget line or fully funded plans for this announcement. And this appears to be a bit of a pattern across government. Only yesterday I learnt that a £1 billion announcement made about carbon capture and storage several years ago still appears nowhere on a Treasury budget line. If the government plays so fast and loose with our public funding, how on earth is the Secretary of State going to deliver the economic stability on which our defence spending relies?
Well, I really encourage the Honourable Lady, and in fact all of the benches opposite, to have a closer look at what we announced yesterday, because this is a fully funded announcement. We've explained where the money is going to come from. We've set out in tables that you can go and read, Madam Deputy Speaker, the funding for the £75 billion. Now, there is a choice, and it is true that choice exists, that I know the front bench needs to talk not only to their backbenchers about, because they won't agree with increasing to 2.5% by 2030, but unfortunately, many of them within their front benches as well, 11 in particular, those will be the ones who have voted against Trident, some of whom wanted to leave our nuclear deterrent behind and possibly even leave NATO as well. But on this side of the House, I can say we are entirely united in the idea of spending 2.5%, setting a date for it now, setting out how that spending is going to work, and making the choices to get there.
Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I strongly welcome this investment, which rightly recognises the increasingly unstable world in which we're operating. Many of our military capabilities are, of course, powered by advanced semiconductors, and recent years have shown how fragile these supply chains can be. So could the Secretary of State set out what the government is doing to develop alliances, strong alliances, focused on securing our supply of this vital component?
My honourable friend's absolutely right. Indeed, in another role as Business Secretary, I took the decision personally on Newport Wafer Fab, and it very much highlighted to me the importance of our own supply chain for advanced semiconductors, particularly now in the defence realm as well. As one of the reasons why, in this plan that we published yesterday, we've committed to a new level of 5% of R&D for defence, to make sure that we are both researching, developing, and then through the expansion of the military capability, the industrial base, producing as well the things that we need for our armed forces.
Ashley Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Labour wants to reach 2.5%. I don't know how many more of my colleagues on these benches need to say that before it actually gets through, and my honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, said that very clearly in his contributions, if anybody was listening. However, the Secretary of State has said repeatedly on the media rounds this morning and in the chamber today that on page 20 we can find the fully costed plan. Now, bearing in mind that there is no mention on page 20 of how this 2.5% will be reached through the cuts to the civil service, which the Secretary of State's given, and also let's bear in mind that the entire civil service budget is only 16.6 billion. Where is the fully funded plan? Because it is not on page 20.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady once again asserts, as if you just asserted often enough, and I wrote down what she said, that their side, she says, wants to reach 2.5%. You can't just assert it. You have to actually will the means to get there, and I did not hear that from the front bench this morning. They did not say that in response to the announcement yesterday. Now, as in all normal cases, and particularly through spending reviews, the Treasury will set out all of the numbers going forward, but the fact of the matter is the figures published yesterday show £75 billion more being spent, actually 77 billion, being spent from this year through to the end of the decade, in part paid for by 72,000 civil servants being removed from the system so we get back to where we were before COVID. Now if Labour doesn't want to follow that particular approach, they have another one they could follow, but she can't just assert that they agree without actually explaining how they're doing it.
In the register of members' interests. I also warmly welcome this increase to 2.5% of defence spending, and I congratulate my right honourable friend and the Prime Minister on the leadership role they're providing to NATO. Could he elaborate a little bit more on the balance of where this extra money will go in terms of meeting the existing challenges in the equipment plan and introducing innovative new capability through the new procurement model that he was commending to the House earlier?
The real approach here will be to make sure that we are both ensuring that we're delivering the things that we've already said that we'll deliver in a changing world where we have, the threat of Iran, the threat of Russia, a much more assertive China, a nuclear-armed North Korea. We're making sure that in those circumstances we adjust our programme to make sure it does what is required. And the new innovations, as I think you will have gathered from my comments about 5% being spent on R&D, are very, very important to us. I can see how now, in an asymmetric war situation, you can end up with the entire Black Sea fleet, Russia's Black Sea fleet, being made inoperative by a navy, Ukraine's, who have no fleet at all, a ghost fleet. And so we do need to look at the way that we do all of that, and this money will be used wisely in that context.
Jim Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, can I first of all thank the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister as well, and our government, for their clear commitment to the 2.5%. And also can I also thank him for the commitment of extra £500 million of aid for Ukraine. Really, really important. I think our Secretary of State and our government is setting the target for the rest of NATO to follow, and I hope that they will do that. I welcome very much the news of the increase in defence spending, which is something that my party, the Democratic Unionist Party, and myself have pushed for. But how much of the increase will be feet on the ground, and how much will be enhanced cyber security? Thank you so much.
Well, in terms of personnel, we're sticking with the Defence Review and the refresh, which set out the exact numbers. I think it is 188,000 through all three services. I've explained in the answer to colleagues previously about the extent to which new technology is really helping to shape our thinking, but also the lessons from Ukraine, and in particular the need to have munitions available and have larger stockpiles available. There are, of course, many excellent locations, including in Northern Ireland, where more munitions and missiles are being created as we speak, with something like an 8 times expansion. And I look forward to visiting some of those who will enjoy the additional £10 billion, bringing the total to, I think, about £25 billion over the next few weeks.
I am anxious to make sure that all colleagues get in, but I would urge brief questions so the Secretary of State can give brief answers. John Barron.
Deputy Speaker, and my right honourable friend will know from PMQs that as chair of the 1922 Defence Committee, this whole party welcomes this announcement. But can I suggest to him that a message from the government, would carry so much greater resonance globally if the official opposition could also sign up to it. I can assure him, as a former member of the armed forces, that actually when the country is speaking as a whole, official opposition and government together, that carries a much greater weight for the good of the country internationally.
My gallant friend's absolutely right. We've seen how that has worked with Ukraine, and I'm sorry it's not working today with the 2.5% and the timeline to get there. I'm afraid it does once again prove that this country's safety is really in the right hands when Conservatives are in power.
McCartney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I just echo the words of the Secretary-General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, yesterday, who, after this defence spending announcement, said, yet again, the United Kingdom was leading by example. In terms of the £500 million support package for Ukraine, and having seen the awful pictures of missile attacks on Ukrainian cities, including the destruction of the TV tower in Kharkiv in the past 48 hours, can my right honourable friend confirm that the much-needed ammunition and missile systems will be over in Ukraine as soon as possible to aid their fight against Russian aggression?
My honourable friend's absolutely right, both about what the Secretary-General said, that we are leading NATO in this regard, but also about the absolute importance of us being there for Ukraine. We cannot afford for this war to be lost. It won't be lost. And I can also confirm to him that there's a comprehensive list of the items that we'll now be supplying that I'll make sure he receives.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It was widely reported some months ago that my right honourable friend, along with the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, had written to the Prime Minister setting out their concerns about the future of Scunthorpe's blast furnaces. For all the reasons he has stated today, this is more important than ever. So can I commend him for his foresight prior to his current role? And can I ask that he will consider the importance of good quality British-made steel in our nation's defence capabilities?
Well, I well remember the pretty much constant lobbying from my honourable friend. She's a great champion for her steelworks, and of course her comments about the importance of British steel being used in British defence is taken on board.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the statement today absolutely answers the widespread assessments of the increase of risk in the world, and we should all be grateful for that. Could my right honourable friend confirm that he, the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister are also discussing with our European partners in NATO their contributions, and could he let the House know how important this is both to the current US administration and any future ones' commitment to NATO as well? Lastly, does he agree with me that innovation from the private sector, like Roke, which has recently opened an office in Gloucester, is going to be an important part of our defence procurement?
Well, he's absolutely right about ensuring we use this to persuade other NATO members to do the same thing. I can tell him that I was pretty proactively speaking to and texting my colleagues throughout NATO and beyond on this just yesterday, and receiving very encouraging responses. And I look forward to hearing more about the company in his constituency.
Andy Carter.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Can I congratulate my right honourable friend and his ministers for the work they've been doing to reform defence procurement, rightly given the significant increase in spending announced by the Prime Minister. Could the Secretary of State just set out how these changes will ensure our military forces receive equipment more quickly, and in particular how it will benefit British manufacturers, particularly so that they can get opportunities from global export?
Well, on that last point, the integrated procurement plan, brilliantly created by my honourable friend, Minister for Defence Procurement, has ensured that export and the exportability is a key part of the contract. So that is going to cover that area of it. Quicker, I mentioned before about how we've already used his model to speed up the production of the Dragonfire in this particular case. We'll also use this integrated procurement model to make sure we don't over-spec things so they become a bit like... I wasn't going to say Ajax, but I'm going to say it. Ajax, which became overspec to the point where it became a very delayed project. Fortunately, now back on track.
Tom Bailey.
Speaker, Stroud constituents will welcome the Prime Minister's boost for defence spending and ongoing focus on the dangers that we all face. Now, the Stroud district is blessed with many strategically important businesses like Stellar Systems, who I was with on Friday, Retro Track and Air, Impcross, to name but a few. These are innovative, nimble and agile companies doing extraordinary things. So on behalf of all the SMEs, small businesses, small family businesses who are playing their part in protecting our country and others around the UK, will the Secretary of State confirm that SMEs will get their fair crack at contracts and that the bigger boys will pay them on time to keep them alive for the benefits of all?
Well, my honourable friend's absolutely right, and I predict that companies in Stroud will do very well from this if they're producing innovative and useful equipment for our armed forces. I absolutely take on board her point about small, medium-sized enterprises. When I was running my printing business and companies would pay late, it would put huge pressure on cash flow. One of the great things about what this government has done is we've sped up the necessity for these large organisations, particularly the primes, to be paying properly and on time.
Marco Longi.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the £75 billion investment, it's a great announcement today, Secretary of State. And does he agree with me that this sends a very clear signal to our brave armed forces that it is this side of the House that backs them, that it sends a signal to the country that it is this side of the House that backs defence of the realm, and it sends a very clear signal to our supply chain up and down the country, such as the many that I know in my constituency of Dudley, that we back their job security. But it also, Mr Secretary of State, I believe, exposes that side for having no plan at all for defence.
Well, my honourable friends hit the nail on the head. The Prime Minister made this announcement yesterday in front of British troops out in Poland doing incredible work. I think the reassurance of the idea that there is a period of time which leads to the 2.5% with the first increase coming immediately really helps them to do their job, because they know that they are wanted, trusted, and that we honour their work. I agree with other comments to be made. It's a shame that's not entirely cross-party.
Stevenson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I warmly welcome this announcement. The Secretary of State was kind enough to call in on me in Wolverhampton North East last week, and I spoke about the importance of aerospace to my local economy with companies like HS Marsden, Collins and Moog Aerospace. How can he ensure that those companies benefit from the highly skilled, well-paid jobs that this uplift in spending will bring? And does he agree with me that industry needs that certainty of cross-party agreement in order to make those investments, and the Labour Party needs to step up?
Very much enjoyed my visit to her constituency, and she was indeed telling me about the defence companies that are so vibrant in her area, and I think the future looks incredibly bright for them, given the amount that we're investing, given that defence is typically an extremely well-paid profession with enormous ability for new apprentices and graduates in particular to be recruited, and so I think her constituents will be very happy about this announcement.
Hudson.
I congratulate the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State for this very welcome announcement of increased defence spending to 2.5% and for the leadership on funding and support for Ukraine. For the sake of freedom, democracy and global safety, it is so important that Ukraine prevails. This announcement shows that it's our Conservative government that will protect our nation and stand with our allies in the face of increasing international threats. Can the Secretary of State confirm that this sensible linear increase in funding on defence will help our defence industry in parallel to ramp up production, meaning that our armed forces will be supported, capable and resilient to be able to keep us and our allies safe?
I absolutely can confirm that, and one of the features of the way that we've done this is to create a straight line from next year to 2030 to make sure that industrial capacity can ramp up with certainty behind it. So I'm very pleased to confirm the answer is yes.
Danny Kruger.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Chief of the Defence Staff from Estonia was in Salisbury Plain in my constituency last week, and he told us that his country has 40,000 men and women in their army reserve ready at 24 hours notice to serve. I call that being on a war footing, considering they have a population 50 times smaller than ours. I'm not proposing we try and replicate that proportionally. That would mean a 2 million strong reserve. But will he give consideration to using some of this money to boosting our very important reserves?
Secretary of State.
My honourable friend will know that we are twinned with Estonia through NATO, and we provide protection for them. They are, of course, very much on the front line with Russia in a way that we're fortunate not to be, so that rather than use some of our 30,000 reserves currently, we're able to use the many other things that we bring to NATO and to their protection, including the ability to provide them with personnel and equipment, which is something that we do on a very regular basis.
Simon Fell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I commend my right honourable friend for the work he's done in setting this new 2.5% baseline? It will reassure our allies, send an important message to our adversaries, and also strengthen our industrial base too. And can I thank him for the work he played in securing £220 million for Barrow as well as the Team Barrow project, securing our future but also easing delivery of Dreadnought and SSN AUKUS. But of course, Barrow Shipyard isn't alone in delivering the submarine enterprise. So could my right honourable friend confirm that some of this £75 billion will be spent on other key sites such as Faslane, Devonport and others?
Absolutely can confirm to him that this is intended to benefit across the country. And actually, in the document itself that we published yesterday, there's a great map which shows all the different areas of the country and how they're going to benefit each region as well. It's on page 10 for reference, and as he rightly says, not just in our nuclear estate but throughout the defence estate, there isn't a constituency in this House which does not benefit from the £75 billion announcement yesterday. It's time for others to follow it.
Robin Miller.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I add my own tribute to the late Lord Field and for him taking the time to talk to this Conservative councillor about a concern that we shared for the weakest and most vulnerable in society, something that reaches across the aisles. There's no doubt the international threat is developing and the world is a more dangerous place, so I really welcome this statement today. And what I hear is an investment in the armed forces we need, not necessarily the armed forces we had. But does my right honourable friend then share my concern that the statement from the opposition that they are planning to conduct a review actually is verging on the careless, in that it only gives comfort to those who seek this UK harm?
He's absolutely right about the armed forces that we need, not the armed forces that we had. And we want our armed forces to be lethal, quick, agile, capable, and that is why it's so important that we put the £75 billion in. But he's also right to point out that to now have yet another review is simply to invite chaos and delay exactly the time our adversaries are looking at us and looking for us to get on with the job of delivering this 2.5%, or rather they're hoping we don't, and I'm afraid it rather plays into our adversaries' hands not to do this.
Illegal.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for the announcement of 2.5% in defence spending by 2030. And would my right honourable friend please acknowledge the fantastic effort delivered by our reserve forces, something I had the pleasure to see myself on last Saturday in Northumberland.
I absolutely welcome my honourable friend's comments. I do join him, and there are many reserves, including in this House, including Minister for Defence and People. And we thank them all for their service, the time they give, and also their employers who give their time back to them to be able to be reservists. And we're very grateful for all that they do.
I thank the Secretary of State for his statement. Point of order, Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to raise a point of order regarding the information we've been receiving in this House about the government's ongoing arms exports to Israel, about which the Deputy Prime Minister spoke earlier too. A hearing finished yesterday at the High Court on a judicial review into arms exports provided lots of information that, and I'll say this politely, is far from the impression we have been given by ministers about how arms sales, and especially about how we have the most robust arms export licences in the world. One such example is that although the government last reviewed and approved arms sales to Israel on the 8th of April, it appears that this did not consider the killing of 3 British aid workers in Israeli airstrikes on Gaza on the 1st of April. I think we all find that shocking. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, can you advise how we can ensure the government is providing this House with up-to-date and accurate information, and how we can best hold the government to account over this pressing and serious matter.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his point of order and giving me notice of it. I think you will be interested to know that ministers were giving evidence to the Business and Trade Committee on this subject earlier today. And in view of that, I am sure he will find a way to ask ministers about any new information which may have come to light since they last answered questions on this subject in the Chamber. And I should also say that the Secretary of State for Defence has stayed to listen to his point of order, and I'm sure that the Treasury bench will feed back the points that he's made. Thank you.